Hey guys, on to the last part of this lecture. I've never done like a four-part lecture about air pollution. So let's talk about the Clean Air Act first. So you should be on, again, the updated lecture, the updated reading guide, and you should be on number 13. Okay, we're on number 13. So first talking about, I don't like talking about laws. I usually skip it and make you look it up yourself, which seems like a really mean thing to do during this like quarantine lecture situation. So you're welcome for that. All right, so let's talk about the Clean Air Act. This is actually one you might have heard of. It was introduced in 1970. It was amended in 77, and it was amended again in 1990. And this is the first kind of air pollution, I don't know, like addressing of air pollution. And it was kind of brought into play because of the lead issue, but it created regulations that states and cities could then enforce, specifically with lead, with ozone, with particulate matter, suspended particulate matter like soot, and then carbon monoxide, NOx, and SOx. Okay? So the primary goal was to protect human health, looking at asthma, looking at things like emphysema, lung cancer, any of those like chronic lung issues. One of the things that stood out, especially in the 70s, was regulating the use of lead in fuels. Like you've seen when you go to the gas station, you see unleaded gasoline. That didn't used to be the case. It was leaded gasoline. And so that dramatically reduced the amount of lead in the atmosphere because gasoline evaporates. It has like a pretty, what is it called? Like low evaporation point. And so it evaporates pretty easily. And so there's lead in the atmosphere because of that. So switching to unleaded gasoline, okay? The secondary goal was to protect environmental and property damage. Thinking back to like the acid deposition and that statue and stuff like that. So 13 summarized air pollution. I just wrote the Clean Air Act. I wrote the primary goal and the secondary goal. So the act gets put into place by Congress. Who enforces it? What agency? Go ahead, Claude. Do you know the agency? Dan, do you know the agency that enforces the Clean Air Act? Who enforces the Clean Air Act? EPA. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Okay, so we have air quality standards for those 6 outdoor pollutants that I mentioned: carbon monoxide, NOx and SOx, suspended particulates, ozone, and lead. And the EPA helps enforce that. Now, I think that you guys have seen that Trump has told the EPA to lift a lot of their standards right now, or self-report a lot of their standards right now in the coronavirus times because of economic issues and not wanting to make it harder for businesses. I don't necessarily want to take a stance on everything. I think you probably know my stance, but please like look into that more, and it'll just be interesting to see environmentally what the effect of COVID-19 has on environmental degradation, including air pollution. So the last thing you want to end with is basically like, what do we do? Like, how do we reduce it and how do we clean it up? So you're kind of going to want to divide number 14 into 2 columns. We have stationary source air pollution, so like things that don't move, and then we have mobile air pollution. So let's start with stationary source. We can prevent by burning low sulfur coal, and this is where the time of the class would be where I'd be like, hey, what's low sulfur coal called? And you'd be like, anthracite, Simek, anthracite. You can also remove sulfur from coal. It's a expensive process, as I think you could imagine. There is another process of creating a syn fuel where you take coal and make it into a liquid or gas, which is rare, and I don't think that's a viable option. And then we can always go back to switching from coal to natural gas and switching to renewables. That was last unit. You guys are aware of that. You had an FRQ on that. Once we do make the air pollution and stationary source, we can remove the pollutants from smokestack. So there's these devices. Actually, there's a company in Milwaukee that makes these devices, these scrubbers that you can attach to smokestacks that remove some of the pollutants. And then the reason that smokestacks are so tall is hopefully to increase the dilution of them, to disperse those emissions as they go downwind. Okay? And then you can go back to green taxes as well. Tax each unit of pollution produced. So that's all for air pollution for sources that are not moving. That same question, so what is it, 14? That same question, let's look now at motor vehicles. So we can go back to walk places, bike places, use buses, use the subway, stuff like that. Improving fuel efficiency. So this was back in chapter 16 when we talked about energy efficiency. And then again, get older cars off the road that are polluting. And so then when you go get your emissions tested in Wisconsin, how often do we get our emissions tested, Mr. Simek?
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years. So to renew your registration, to get that sticker for your license plate in Wisconsin, and we need to test every other year. So we require emission control devices to make sure that your car, the reason you go do that is to make sure your car isn't polluting too much based on standards. Okay? And then those standards, those emission standards have been set by the EPA. And then finally, what about indoor air pollution? So what year did they ban indoor smoking in Wisconsin?
How long has that been now?
It's after we lived here, maybe like 2009, 10?
Has it been that long now?
I don't know. I remember going to Boulder Junction and it being really smoky. But banning indoor smoking, and that includes, as of January 2019, that includes vaping. So they consider vape devices as indoor smoking in Wisconsin for about a year and a couple months now. Setting stricter emission standards for formaldehyde when you have that new carpet or furniture. Again, like that new car smell, what you're smelling are the formaldehyde and VOCs in the new material. Preventing that radon infiltration. We talked about radon mitigators. And then just making choices for cleaner products. That's the prevention. In terms of the reduction, this is where I'd show you in our classroom at school the vent. So looking like there's a dial on my wall that I can like ventilate better. And looking at the fume hood, which is always behind me, which I know I use as a filing cabinet. But if we ever needed to use it for a reaction, we could. So using adjustable air vents, workspaces, and just circulating air more. Those rooftop greenhouses that you can circulate air through, and then venting wood burning stoves. So a lot of it has to do with just like proper circulation of air. If you're painting a room, ventilate it properly. If you're using a high, like a glue with a powerful odor, like do it in the garage. Like don't do things in the basement where air can't circulate, that kind of thing. So this one was kind of short, which I know you're probably okay with, but you should have finished through number 15. That is our last lecture for 2020. That is all that AP is requiring of us for the exam. And so that's it. Congratulations.